In the shadows of myth and reality, monsters stir. From ancient legends to modern nightmares, we explore the creatures that haunt our stories, and sometimes our lives. Welcome to Among Monsters podcast, where the line between man and monsters is thinner than you think.
The Chameleon Killer, Charles Ray Hatcher's Decades of Deception. I'm Damien Vale, and tonight on Among Monsters, we crack open the chilling case of one of America's most unnervingly slippery, most profoundly manipulative, and disturbingly persistent killers. This was a man who, with chameleon-like cunning, effortlessly masqueraded as the innocent victim, the raving madman, and sometimes even the benevolent good guy, all depending on which meticulously crafted lie he needed to spin, which carefully constructed facade he needed to wear, to dance away from the shadow of murder. This is the story of Charles Ray Hatcher, a career criminal, a ruthless serial killer, and a master manipulator who wielded the legal system itself like a finely honed, deceptive tool. A specter of injustice, a man who walked freely through prison doors that should have remained bolted shut, sealed forever against his return. A chilling pattern emerged each time he was released, each time the system faltered. He returned with an almost ritualistic dedication to the dark work of hurting children and extinguishing the lives of strangers. Between the tumultuous 1960s and the early, uneasy years of the 1980s, Hatcher's shadow lengthened across the American landscape. He confessed to over 16 murders, yet, through a perverse twist of justice and his own cunning, was convicted of only 2. In his wake, he left a devastating trail of horror that spanned nearly 3 decades and bled across the borders of multiple states. He may not be a household name etched into the public consciousness like Dahmer or Bundy. His infamy less sensational, his monstrousness less theatrically displayed. But his evil? It was every bit as deliberate, every bit as monstrous, and perhaps most infuriatingly, far more insidiously persistent, a testament to systemic failure as much as individual depravity. The breeding ground of cruelty, Hatcher's early life. Charles Ray. Hatcher entered the world on July 16, 1929, in the small, unassuming Mound City, Missouri. He was the youngest of 4 sons, born into a home that was not merely dysfunctional, but deeply, violently broken, a crucible of simmering resentments and explosive rage. His father, a brutal, pervasive alcoholic, terrorized the family, his presence a constant, unpredictable threat. And then a chilling precursor to Charles's own path. His oldest brother, Arthur, was convicted of murder in 1935, when Charles himself was a mere 6 years old, barely old enough to grasp the full implications of such darkness, yet steeped in its very essence. Violence, it seemed, ran in the very bloodline, a grim inheritance passed down through generations. By the time Charles reached his 10th year, a nascent darkness had already taken root. He was already a thief, his small hands reaching for what was not his. By 12, the threads of deceit were woven seamlessly into his young character. He was a natural liar and a budding manipulator, adept at twisting reality to his will. He drifted through his academic life, dropping out of school in the 8th grade, the formal structures of society holding no sway over his burgeoning pathology. His teenage years became a grim carousel, a ceaseless cycle of juvenile detention, followed by brief stints of freedom, only to return to the cold confines of jail. His early offenses, on the surface, were petty crimes: the theft of bicycles, opportunistic break-ins at local shops, the thrill of stealing cars. But they were constant, a relentless drumbeat of transgression. One arrest followed another with predictable regularity, painting a portrait of a young man utterly unmoored from societal norms. His first true prison sentence came in 1949, when he was just 20 years old, a young man already hardened by a lifetime of crime. He had stolen a car in St. Joseph, Missouri, earning him a 2-year sentence. While incarcerated, Hatcher, displaying an early glimpse of his cunning, was captured, only to escape again. A restless, elusive spirit. It was during this period that he forged a chilling reputation: clever, unnervingly cold, and utterly, profoundly without remorse. That dark reputation, a shadow of his true nature, would cling to him, following him like a faithful, grim companion for the remainder of his life's destructive journey. The master of deceit, playing the system. By the 1950s, Charles Ray Hatcher had not merely engaged in his game of deception, he had perfected it, honing his craft to a terrifying art form. He learned, with an almost intuitive understanding, how to manipulate the very systems designed to contain him. Psychologists, with their complex theories of the mind, became pawns in his elaborate charade. Court systems, with their rigid rules and slow processes, were his instruments. Parole boards, tasked with assessing rehabilitation, were skillfully bent to his will. Even hardened prison officials found themselves swayed by his convincing performances. His signature tactic, a chilling testament to his psychological acuity, involved feigning mental illness. He would descend into convincing bouts of madness, claiming to hear tormenting voices, fabricating elaborate delusions, all to secure a transfer to a mental hospital instead of a harsh prison cell. Once within the softer confines of psychiatric care, he would perform an equally convincing recovery, claiming to be miraculously cured, his demons vanquished, his mind now clear. This charade, often bolstered by the hope of rehabilitation in mental health professionals, typically earned him an early release, sending him back into the unsuspecting world to continue his dark work. He became a chameleon, a master of transformation. He was profoundly, convincingly mentally ill when it served his immediate purpose, allowing him to evade harsh punishment. And he was equally alarmingly sane, clear-headed, and persuasive when it afforded him an escape back to freedom. In 1959, the federal system briefly caught him. He was convicted of forging checks in San Francisco and funneled into the daunting confines of San Quentin State Prison. But even this formidable institution could not contain his insidious charm. After his release, he set his compass eastward, his shadow falling upon Nebraska. And it was there, in the quiet heartland, that the true escalating tide of his violence began to rise. The system's failure, a trail of unheeded warnings. In 1961, the chilling innocence of childhood was shattered by Hatcher's predatory grip. He abducted a 7-year-old boy from a park in Lincoln, Nebraska. The child endured a horrifying ordeal, sexually assaulted and strangled. But by some miracle, by some sheer force of will, the boy survived. Hatcher was eventually caught, his brief reign of terror curtailed. He was convicted of attempted murder and, in a devastatingly lenient sentence that would haunt future victims, was sent to the Nebraska State Penitentiary for a mere 5 years. 5 years. For attempting to murder a child. It was the first of many profound and tragic instances where the very system designed to protect failed to recognize the true depth of his monstrousness, failing to stop him before he could kill. During this brief incarceration, Hatcher intensified his long-running act of feigned mental illness. He claimed to hear disembodied voices, whispering malevolent commands. He claimed to suffer from profound amnesia, conveniently forgetting the horrific details of his crimes. He was shuttled back and forth between psychiatric evaluations and prison cells, a cunning dance through the bureaucratic maze. By 1963, a chillingly accurate yet ultimately insufficient diagnosis emerged from the medical community. Doctors labeled him a sociopath with sexual deviations. Yet, even with this stark assessment, he was still considered fit to stand trial and, more disturbingly, potentially redeemable. And so, in 1970, Charles Ray Hatcher, a known sociopath and child predator, was paroled. The prison gates swung open. Just 1 year later, another young boy's life was tragically extinguished. In August of 1971, the quiet town of Antioch, California, was rocked by the discovery of 6-year-old William Freeman. His small body was found in a drainage ditch, sexually assaulted and brutally strangled. The town was gripped by a collective horror. Simultaneously, in a cruel twist of fate, police arrested Willie Monroe, a mentally ill man who had been seen talking to children at the very park where William had vanished. Monroe, confused, incoherent, and tragically susceptible to manipulation, confessed to the murder. But Charles Ray Hatcher knew the truth, because he was the one who had brutally killed William Freeman, and he said nothing. Instead, he simply fled the state, shedding his identity like a snake sheds its skin. He adopted new names, drifting through the anonymous currents of American life. Willie Monroe, an innocent man, was wrongfully committed for the murder, his freedom stolen. Hatcher remained free, a shadow moving between states, ready to strike again. Over the next harrowing decade, Hatcher cycled through at least 12 aliases, a phantom shifting identities to evade detection. He committed a chilling litany of crimes across California, Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Nevada. He was a constant nomad, an unseen menace on the roads. And every single time he was arrested, typically for assault, sexual misconduct, or theft, he would meticulously stage another elaborate mental breakdown. And, infuriatingly, it worked. Between 1971 and 1982, Charles Ray Hatcher was in and out of mental hospitals more than a dozen times. A parade of at least 7 different psychiatrists grappling with his complex and deceptive presentation would declare him either borderline psychotic or, bafflingly, not criminally insane, depending on the precise moment and location of his evaluation and the specific performance he chose to deliver. He would play the system like a virtuoso performs a complex piano piece, stabbing himself to evoke sympathy, babbling incoherently about demons to appear unhinged, attempting suicide to signal desperation. Then, with terrifying speed, he would shift gears, calmly asking for release, convincing his captors that he was cured, stable, harmless. And at every stop along this grim, deceptive journey, more victims followed, their lives extinguished in the gaps of a failing system. The hunter returns, St. Joseph and the final confession. In 1982, the shadow of Charles Ray Hatcher returned to St. Joseph, Missouri, his hometown. The people there, living their quiet lives, did not yet know it, but a monster refined by decades of deceit and violence had come home. On July 29th, a 12-year-old boy named Steele Jr. was abducted from a local park, his innocence violently snatched away. His small body was found days later, strangled, sexually assaulted, and callously dumped in the river. Police were desperate, the community gripped by fear. The case bore an eerie, unsettling similarity to past attacks, murders that had occurred in California, Nebraska, and Illinois, whispers of a phantom predator. But no one, in their worst nightmares, connected them to the quiet, unassuming Charles Hatcher, the man who had returned home, until he connected himself. On August 3rd, 1982, in a stunning, almost unbelievable turn of events, a man named Charles Hatcher calmly walked into the St. Joseph police station. His purpose, to confess to the murder of Steele Jr. Officers were stunned, their professionalism momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of the act. Then he uttered something even stranger, a revelation that expanded the scope of their understanding from a single horrific crime to a nightmare of epic proportions. He claimed he'd killed dozens of people over the past 20 years. The confession poured out of him, a torrent of chilling details, names, descriptions, locations spanning states all over the Midwest. Some details matched open cases, fragments fitting perfectly into unresolved puzzles. Others were entirely new, pointing to unseen horrors. Detectives grappling with the sheer volume and the unsettling composure of the confessor weren't sure if he was finally telling the unvarnished truth or simply playing another elaborate, manipulative game. But they knew, with a visceral certainty, that they had something serious, something terrifyingly real. They charged him with the murder of Steele Jr. This time, finally, unequivocally, there would be no escape. The chameleon had exhausted his colors. Hatcher pleaded guilty to the murder, perhaps knowing his game was finally up, and was sentenced to life in prison, without parole. The legal system, after decades of being outmaneuvered, had finally contained him. It was only then, when he was safely and irrevocably behind bars, that investigators truly began the painstaking work of piecing together the chilling tapestry of his full career. They unearthed old case files, unsolved murders and assaults that precisely fit Hatcher's transient timeline. Cold cases involving children, vulnerable hitchhikers, and unsuspecting teenage boys. By Hatcher's own cold admission, a chilling testament to his self-awareness, he claimed to have killed 16 people between 1969 and 1982. Most were young boys, their innocence cruelly shattered. Others were men he met while traveling, casual encounters turned deadly. A few, he claimed, were never found, their bodies lost to the vast indifference of the land. He would later, with a chillingly detached resignation, say, "I'm just a killer. I can't help it." The final, true tally of his victims may never be fully known, swallowed by the passage of time and his own deceptive memory. In 984, 2 years after his final arrest and incarceration, Charles Ray Hatcher was transferred to the Missouri State Penitentiary, the end of his road. On December 7th, guards found him dead in his cell. He had hanged himself with electrical wire. His final act, even in death, a desperate grasp at control. He left no note, no explanation for his life of violence, no apology for the devastation he wrought, just silence, and dozens upon dozens of grieving families forever denied the closure of a full reckoning, their pleas for justice echoing unanswered. The enduring warning, a system's blight. The case of Charles Ray Hatcher stands as one of the most glaring, most infuriating failures of the American legal and mental health systems. He was arrested over 20 times, his name a recurring blight on police blotters. He was sent to numerous psychiatric hospitals, institutions meant to heal or contain, and yet, time and again, he walked free from multiple parole hearings, his lies proving more persuasive than the grim reality of his past. Each time, the signs were unmistakably there: the escalating violence, the documented sexual abuse, the blatant cunning manipulation. But the signals were missed, the connections were not made, and he kept getting released. Not because he was a criminal genius in the conventional sense, but because the system, in its fragmented complexity, was simply not paying close enough attention. And in those vast systemic gaps, more innocent lives were lost, extinguished by a predator who had learned precisely how to exploit the flaws in the very mechanisms designed to stop him. Hatcher's story isn't just a tale of murder and depravity. It's a stark, undeniable warning about how monsters can adapt, chameleon-like, to their environment, how they cunningly hide behind official court records and the confusing jargon of psychiatric reports, how they prey not just on their vulnerable victims, but on the very systems designed to stop them, turning justice into a cruel farce. He was the monster no one truly saw, because the collective gaze was too busy looking for someone who fit a different, more easily recognizable profile. But Hatcher didn't have a static profile. He had a chillingly adaptable plan. His strategy was simple: be forgettable. Be broken when necessary. Be just smart enough to fool the system, but irrevocably cruel enough to feed on the innocent, leaving their shattered lives in his wake. And for more than 20 years, it worked. Tonight we speak their names, giving voice to those he silenced: Michelle Steele Jr., William Freeman, and all the unnamed victims lost to the long, dark shadow of Charles Ray Hatcher. We remember them, not just as victims, but as vibrant lives interrupted, futures stolen, dreams forever unfulfilled. And we say their names, loud and clear, so the world never forgets that a man like Hatcher walked free for far too long, a testament to systemic complacency. This has been Among Monsters. I'm Damien Vale. Until next time, be cautious of those who smile too easily, who speak too softly, or who tell you exactly what you want to hear. Because sometimes, the most dangerous monsters are the ones who've been caught before, and tragically, devastatingly, released.
Thank you for listening to Among Monsters podcast. Find more episodes of Among Monsters podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, or anywhere premium podcasts exist. Email us at amongmonsterspodcast@gmail.com.